Tonight's case begins with a question that has haunted humanity for centuries. What if the monster isn't someone else? What if it's already inside us? In 1886, author Robert Louis Stevenson introduced the world to one of the most disturbing ideas in literature, that every person may contain two selves, one civilized and one far more dangerous. The story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde isn't just a gothic horror tale, it's an investigation into the darker side of human nature. Using the research power of artificial intelligence, our hosts Elias and Sarah examine the evidence behind Stevenson's classic story, exploring the psychology, the history, and the unsettling question at the heart of it all. Are good and evil truly separate? Or are they simply two faces of the same person? Let's open the file.
Imagine stepping onto a London stage in 1887. You are a highly respected, immensely talented actor named Richard Mansfield.
And you're starring in a brand new stage adaptation.
Exactly. And your performance is just brilliant. The way you contort your body, the way you alter your voice, it is so visceral, so terrifyingly realistic that the audience is completely mesmerized.
Right, they've never seen anything like it.
But then, a year later, a string of gruesome unsolved murders paralyzes the Whitechapel district of London. The public is terrified. They are desperate for answers, and in their panic, they actually point the finger at you.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. Your acting on that stage was so convincing, capturing the dual nature of man so perfectly that people honestly believed you might be Jack the Ripper.
The hysteria was so intense.
Yeah, the hysteria reaches such a fever pitch that your play is forced to shut down entirely. So, today we are opening the case file on how a fictional novella written in 1886 accidentally turned a respected stage actor into a prime suspect for the most infamous serial killer in history. We're doing a deep dive into Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
You know, the Richard Mansfield story perfectly captures the philosophical stakes Stevenson was playing with here. Because before this novella, the cultural concept of a monster was largely external.
Like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Right, from earlier in the century. The terrifying creature there is a physical, external creation. It's literally stitched together from dead body parts. It's something that chases you from the outside.
A physical threat.
Exactly. But Stevenson flips that entirely. He proposes a much more insidious threat. He asks, what if the most dangerous monster isn't lurking in the foggy woods outside your home? What if the monster is the one already living inside your own mind, just simply waiting for you to give it permission to come out?
That internal geography is exactly the premise we are investigating today. And to understand how Stevenson diagnosed this, we have to look at the environment that shaped him. So, Robert Louis Stevenson was born in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1850.
He was a deeply sickly child.
He was. Plagued by severe respiratory issues that kept him bedridden, just trapped indoors for long stretches of his early life. But what he was looking at through those windows is crucial to the case file. He grew up in a city that was quite literally physically split in two.
The visual duality of Edinburgh.
Right. You had the new town, characterized by sweeping Georgian architecture, wide streets, and the respectable, wealthy elite. And just a stone's throw away, you had the old town. Dark, squalid, cramped, disease-ridden wines where infamous grave robbers like Burke and Hare had operated just a few decades prior.
He absorbed that split every single day. And that physical divide in Edinburgh serves as a perfect microcosm for the broader late Victorian era, because this was a profoundly contradictory time.
On the surface, it looks great.
Yeah, on the surface, you have an era defined by unprecedented technological progress, industrial wealth, the absolute height of the British Empire. But running parallel to all that top-hatted respectability was a deep, pervasive pessimism.
Lots of anxiety.
Huge amounts of anxiety. There were intense underlying fears of imperial decline, of urban poverty and moral decay, and the society operated under these incredibly strict, often oppressive moral expectations.
Which creates a lot of pressure.
Exactly. Stevenson tapped into an emerging societal terror that all this civilization, the manners, the tea times, the strict social codes, it was just an incredibly fragile veneer hiding primal, animalistic urges that could break through at any moment.
What gets me about Stevenson's setup is how mundane the horror actually starts. We don't open in a spooky laboratory with bubbling chemicals.
No, not at all.
Our entry point into the case is an observant, incredibly reserved lawyer named Mr. Utterson. He's just on a standard Sunday walk with his friend, Mr. Enfield, when they pass a very sinister-looking, neglected door in an otherwise respectable neighborhood.
And Enfield has a story about that door.
A deeply unsettling story. He was walking home at 3 in the morning when he saw a small, deformed, deeply detestable man casually cross paths with a young girl. And instead of stepping aside, the man calmly tramples the child in the street, leaves her screaming, and just keeps walking like a juggernaut.
The detail of him trampling the girl is so jarring, specifically because of the emotional vacuum surrounding it.
It's so cold.
It is unprovoked, cold brutality. There is a complete lack of empathy, but the bizarre nature of the crime escalates immediately. The crowd corners this man, who we learn is Mr. Hyde, and they demand he pay the girl's family restitution.
And Hyde doesn't even argue.
No, he uses a key to open that very sinister door and returns with a check for nearly £100. But the name signed on the bottom of the check isn't Edward Hyde. It is the signature of the highly respectable, wealthy, and well-known society physician Dr. Henry Jekyll.
Utterson is Dr. Jekyll's lawyer, and he already knows that Jekyll recently, and very bizarrely, changed his will to leave his entire fortune to this mysterious Edward Hyde. So naturally, Utterson assumes his respectable friend is being blackmailed for some youthful indiscretion.
That's the logical conclusion.
Right. But then we see a horrific escalation nearly a year later in the timeline. An elderly, beloved gentleman, Sir Danvers Carew, is brutally beaten to death in the street, an event witnessed by a maid looking out her window.
A completely unprovoked attack.
Hyde attacks the old man with a heavy wooden cane, beating him with such terrifying fury that the maid can actually hear the man's bones shattering, and the physical evidence left at the scene. The broken half of the murder weapon, which Utterson immediately recognizes as a cane he had personally gifted to Dr. Jekyll years ago.
The physical evidence here points us to one of the most compelling structural metaphors in the case file: the real estate.
The houses.
Yeah, Dr. Jekyll lives in a grand house situated in a wealthy square, a property that presents what Stevenson calls a great air of wealth and comfort. It is the architectural equivalent of a successful Victorian gentleman.
But Hyde's place is totally different.
Right. Hyde is only ever seen entering and exiting a door situated in a blind, windowless, blistered building in a dingy alleyway that shows prolonged and sordid negligence. The brilliant twist that Utterson eventually pieces together is that these aren't two different locations.
They're the exact same property.
Yes. The reputable, beautiful front entrance and the sordid, neglected rear laboratory are physically connected. It's a structural manifestation of Jekyll's own divided mind.
We see this perfectly illustrated when Utterson and the police go to a seedy district in Soho to search Hyde's separate apartment after the murder of Carew. You would fully expect a literal monster's lair to be filthy, scattered with garbage, reflecting his depraved nature.
But they walk in and find the exact opposite.
Yeah, what do they find?
They find a space furnished with immense luxury and elegant taste. There's a closet filled with fine vintage wine, there are expensive silver plates, and there's a beautiful, valuable painting hanging on the wall.
Which is very much Jekyll's style.
It is unequivocally Dr. Jekyll's taste. This is a critical piece of evidence. It proves Jekyll wasn't just tolerating Hyde as a side effect of an experiment. He was actively facilitating him. He was deliberately creating a safe, comfortable, luxurious hideout for his dark urges to retreat to.
Wait, so he's essentially buying fine wine and decorating a bachelor pad for his own evil alter ego.
He is outfitting his own shadow. It's a complete indictment of Jekyll's complicity in the whole affair, long before the final revelations.
The clues just keep stacking up from there. Utterson has his head clerk, Mr. Guest, who happens to be a handwriting expert, examine a note allegedly written by Hyde. Guest compares it to a dinner invitation written by Jekyll.
And what does he find?
The clerk realizes the handwriting isn't just similar, it's completely identical. It's the exact same hand, simply sloped in opposite directions. This slow burn of evidence builds to a terrifying climax.
Breaking of the door.
Right. Utterson and Jekyll's butler, Poole, hear a strange, desperate voice crying out from behind the locked door of Jekyll's laboratory. Fearing Jekyll has been murdered, they break down the door with an axe.
And they don't find Jekyll.
No. Inside, they do not find Dr. Jekyll. They find Mr. Hyde, dead on the floor from self-inflicted poison, wearing clothes that are comically, tragically far too big for him. And waiting on the desk is a massive packet of documents containing a full confession.
The confession forces us to move from the narrative facts of the case into the investigation of its deeper historical and psychological meanings. When we examine the physical descriptions of Hyde throughout the sources, Stevenson repeatedly uses words like ape-like, troglodytic, and dwarfish.
Very primitive terms.
Exactly. We have to ground that in the anxiety-inducing science of the 1880s. Charles Darwin had published The Descent of Man in 1871, establishing that humans evolved from lesser primates. And in the wake of that, you had Cesare Lombroso's theory of atavism.
Lombroso's atavism was this deeply unsettling Victorian idea that evolution could actually go backward, wasn't it?
Precisely. They legitimately feared that an individual or even an entire society could physically revert to a primitive caveman-like state. Lombroso proposed the idea of the born criminal, someone who exhibited the physical and mental traits of earlier savage evolutionary stages.
So to a Victorian reader, Hyde isn't a supernatural demon summoned from the underworld.
No, not at all. He represents the terrifying anxiety of human devolution, the fear that, underneath all the tailored suits and polite conversation, society could regress back into the mud. Medical professionals of the era were documenting real clinical cases of multiple personalities, which means Stevenson's audience was primed for this concept, not as ghost story fantasy, but as unnerving medical reality.
They're reading about it in the news.
Exactly. There were widely publicized historical cases, like a woman known as Felita X and another named Mary Reynolds. These women exhibited dual personalities with completely different moods, different memories, and remarkably, echoing the clues Stevenson uses with Mr. Guest, completely different handwriting styles.
That's a wild detail to pull from real life.
It is. One personality would be melancholic and reserved, while the other would be joyous, uninhibited, and aggressive. Stevenson's portrayal of dissociation was incredibly modern, utilizing the clinical language of hysteria that doctors were actively debating in the medical journals of the 1880s.
Looking at this through a modern lens, it feels like Stevenson accidentally predicted Freud before Freud had even published his major works. The sources provide a breakdown of the characters using Sigmund Freud's model of the psyche, and the map aligns almost perfectly.
The alignment is uncanny. If we apply that framework, Mr. Hyde is the pure embodiment of the id. The id is the primitive, impulsive part of our psyche that operates entirely on the pleasure principle.
It just wants what it wants.
Exactly. It demands immediate gratification, unbridled lust, and explosive rage, with absolutely zero regard for morality or consequences. Hyde doesn't care who he destroys, whether he's trampling a helpless child or bludgeoning an innocent old man. He is pure appetite.
And Dr. Jekyll operates as the ego. The ego is the conscious, rational self, the mediator trying to navigate the real world. Jekyll is desperately trying to maintain his highly respected social standing while constantly negotiating the overwhelming desires of his id.
He's stuck in the middle.
Yeah, he wants the forbidden pleasure, but he desperately needs to keep his reputation intact.
Which leaves the superego, the moral conscience. In this story, the superego is the suffocating, heavily enforced moral code of Victorian society. It is the crushing weight of public expectation, the demand for absolute propriety at all times.
And that's what breaks him.
It is ultimately the superego that destroys Jekyll. After Hyde commits the brutal murder of Carew, and especially after Hyde reveals his terrifying transformation to his colleague, Dr. Lanyon, a shock so profound it literally stops Lanyon's heart and kills him.
The guilt becomes too much.
The superego shatters Jekyll under the immense weight of his own remorse and societal shame.
Bringing it back to the Mansfield play and the public terror of 1888, you can see why the Jack the Ripper connection happened. The public wasn't just scared of a man with a knife, they were terrified by the concept that a respectable gentleman, an ego they might interact with every day, could be hiding a murderous id beneath his top hat.
The fiction bled into reality because it gave a face to their deepest psychological anxieties.
We do have to address a major complication in the case file, though. A difficult truth that often gets lost in pop culture adaptations. We have a tendency to reduce Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde to a simplistic, black and white battle of good versus evil, where Jekyll is the tragic hero and Hyde is the villain.
But the evidence from Stevenson's text tells a much darker, much more cynical story. Hyde is undeniably pure evil, but Jekyll is not pure good.
No, he really isn't. In his final confession, Jekyll admits that he is composite. He wasn't some naive scientist who made a tragic mistake during a routine lab experiment. He deliberately, methodically sought out and created the chemical potion because he wanted a loophole.
He knew exactly what he was doing.
He wanted to indulge his dark, illicit desires without risking his pristine public reputation. He wanted the absolute freedom of sin without the societal bill coming due.
The language he uses in that confession is incredibly telling. He describes the first time he drank the potion and transformed into Hyde. He doesn't describe horror or revulsion.
He likes it.
He writes that it braced and delighted me like wine. He felt younger, lighter, and happier in that deformed, wicked body. Why? Because for the first time in his life, he was free from the crushing, exhausting pressure of being a perfect Victorian gentleman. He wasn't a victim of his experiment, he was an addict chasing a high.
And like any addiction, he built up a tolerance and the substance took over. Eventually, he starts waking up as Hyde without even taking the potion. The control is completely lost.
Carl Jung's theory of the shadow offers an even deeper complication to this dynamic. Jung argued that every human being possesses a shadow self, the repressed, denied, and hidden aspects of our personality, the things society tells us are unacceptable.
So everyone has a Hyde.
From a Jungian perspective, Jekyll's tragedy wasn't simply that he possessed a dark side. We all do. His fatal error was that he repressed it so intensely and for so long to fit society's impossibly strict rules. He essentially created a psychological pressure cooker.
There is a brilliant quote from Jekyll in the book that perfectly illustrates that pressure cooker. He says, "My devil had been long caged. He came out roaring."
I love that quote.
It's so powerful. By attempting to completely sever and ignore his natural flaws, he didn't eliminate them. He just allowed them to ferment into something lethal. When the shadow finally found a release valve, it didn't emerge as minor misbehavior or temporary lapse in judgment. It exploded as murderous, uncontrollable rage.
Gathering all this evidence brings us to the verdict of our investigation. When you close the file on the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it becomes abundantly clear that this is not a science fiction story about a magic potion, nor is it a simple monster myth.
It's much deeper.
It is a profound, terrifying psychological profile. It serves as a study of the mechanics of addiction, a stark warning about the lethal dangers of severe societal repression, and a brilliant exploration of the divided architecture of the human mind.
The central quote from Jekyll's confession remains the ultimate takeaway here. Man is not truly one, but truly two. Stevenson proved to his Victorian readers, and to us, that the respectable, wealthy facade of the cultural elite is absolutely no guarantee against the dark secrets lurking within.
The monster doesn't have to be stitched together in a lab.
No, and it isn't waiting in the shadows of an alleyway. It is renting a room in the back of your own mind, and sometimes you are the one pouring its wine.
The Victorian era might seem incredibly distant, stuffy, and outdated, but the core mechanics of Stevenson's warning are more relevant now than ever. Think about the sheer amount of energy we expend today projecting our own Dr. Jekyll to the world.
Especially online.
Exactly. We meticulously curate our lives, we manage our professional reputations, we filter our photos, and we hide our flaws, our anxieties, and our darker thoughts behind polished, perfectly acceptable public personas. We are still building the beautiful front house while ignoring the blistered door in the alley.
It leaves you with a strange thought regarding how we navigate the modern world, specifically with technology. Today, we don't need to lock ourselves in a laboratory and drink a chemical potion to separate our actions from our identity. We just need an anonymous internet avatar.
A digital Hyde.
Exactly. If Stevenson were writing this exact same story today, Mr. Hyde wouldn't be physically lurking in the foggy, gaslit alleys of London. He would be living in the comment sections, unleashing his uninhibited rage and cruelty, completely and utterly untethered from the respectable, smiling Dr. Jekyll who was quietly typing those words on a keyboard.
It's a chilling parallel.
It really is. So if you were handed a potion that allowed you to indulge your deepest, darkest desires with absolutely zero consequences to your reputation, are you entirely sure you wouldn't drink it? Thank you for opening a case file with us today on The Deep Dive. Our investigation into the nature of the mind continues next time.
As we close the file on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the real horror isn't a laboratory experiment or a mysterious potion. It's the idea that the line between civilization and savagery may be far thinner than we like to believe. Stevenson's warning was simple and deeply unsettling. The monster we fear may not live in the shadows of the city. It may live in the shadows of our own minds. The evidence is in. The dossier is complete.